Welcome back to Snippet Coder, and we are back with another video. In this video we will learn about Flutter State Management with Riverpod. So why we use Riverpod for Flutter State Management? Basically, Riverpod is a popular Flutter State Management library that share many of the advantages of the provider and bring many additional benefits. But it is very powerful state management library that allow us to easily create, access, combine provider with minimum boilerplate code, write testable code and keep your logic outside the widget tree, catch programming error at the compile time rather than at runtime. So Riverpod versus provider. So let's analyze the difference between both the Riverpod and the provider. So in the provider we have the runtime exception, but that are handled and corrected with the Riverpod. Provider are not compile safe while Riverpod are. In provider we can't declare multiple provider of the same type, but in Riverpod we can do without overriding the others. We can declare the provider and its class without scattering the app root file in the Riverpod. In Riverpod, the provider are declared globally and can be used anywhere in the app using either the consumer widget or context.read. In provider, dependency can lead to horribly nested code, while it is easy in the Riverpod for the provider to consume another using provider reference. So let's do the Riverpod installation. Step 1. We have to add the latest version of the Flutter_Riverpod as a dependency in our pubspec, and here we have to add in the dependency Flutter_Riverpod, and the version you have to use the latest version. So now let's get started with the Riverpod. Step 1. Once that Riverpod is installed, we have to wrap our root widget with the provider scope. That we have to do in our main.dart file, and here you can see we have that run app provider scope. We have wrap it with our child my app. Provider scope is a widget that stores the state of all the provider we create. Next step, we have to define the provider itself. We have to create the provider like this way. Final welcome provider is equal to provider reference is the parameter, and here we have to put the string welcome to Riverpod. This is a very simple provider we are creating here, just for see that how Riverpod work. So now we have to read that provider in the Riverpod. For that we have to use the provider within our app in two ways. First way is we have to extend the app with the consumer widget, and here we have that in the build function we have that two parameters. First one is a build context and the second one is a widget reference. Here we have to create a one variable for final welcome string is equal to reference.watch, and here we have to provide the provider name that is welcome provider which we have created. And the second way we can use that consumer widget, and there we have to define the context, reference and the child, and there we can do the same way, but the simpler way is by changing the status widget to the consumer widget. That is the way 1, and here you can see we are just extending it with the consumer widget. So how we can update this value in the provider? So far we managed to read the provider value inside the widget, but provider itself does not give us any capability to change its value. For that we need to create a state provider. First we have to change this one to the state provider, change the value to the int type, and here we are just initializing with the 0. Then we have to modify our widget code like this way, and here you can see we have changed the variable to welcome counter is equal to reference.watch welcome provider, and here we have given one button with the floating action button, and when we click on that button it will increase the value of this state, and here we are just using that welcome counter with the time by putting the message here welcome to Riverpod, and the welcome counter we are giving here. When we click on the button it will increment the state, and it will give us the total number when we click on that button, and here is the output of that application. When we click on this plus button it will show us welcome to Riverpod, and it will show here the number of time we click on that button. So in this way we can update the provider value also. So now let's proceed further. So here we have used one thing, that is widget reference. Here also you can see we are using widget reference everywhere. So what is widget reference? So now let's understand what is widget reference. So as we have seen, we can watch the provider value by using a ref object of type widget reference. So this is available as an argument when we use consumer or consumer widget, and as a property when we subclass from the consumer state. So in the Riverpod documentation, define the widget reference as an object that allows widget to interact with the provider. So to have a better understanding of what the purpose of widget reference, so let's compare it with the build context. So in the build context, we have that widget in the widget tree such as theme of context, media query of context. Widget reference let us access any provider inside our application. So in the other words, we can say like widget reference let us access any provider we want. This is by design because all the Riverpod provider are global. So how many types of provider we have in the Riverpod? So let's see. We have first one is a state provider. So basically state provider expose a value that can be modified from outside. As we saw in that example before, we access that state through the state variable and we can change it, very similar to the value notifier. So when we click on that button of add in the floating action button, you can see here that value has been changed. So there we are using just that state provider. Then we have the future provider. So basically in the future provider, construct an asynchronous value or the async value and has the operation of an ordinary future. So basically it is useful to load data from the service whose method to obtain this data is asynchronous. Then we have the stream provider. It is same like future provider, but in that stream provider, we can expose the last value in the stream, and this is very ideal for the communication in the real time with Firebase or some other API whose event can be interrupted in the stream. So then we have that state notifier provider, that is very important. So in the production level application, we just use this state notifier provider. We can create the state notifier and expose its state, the most useful logic component, and it's allow us easy access to state, which is usually a private property that modified by the public method. So now let's move further and we will do all these provider in the example. So we can use that future provider with the Riverpod. For that future provider example, we have to create one class that is named as a fake country code client class that has a get method and that will return us the country code by taking country as a parameter. So this is the function and the class fake country code client. Here you can see we have that function name that is get, and here we are just passing that country as a parameter and we are making it as a async here, and we are awaiting for 2 seconds just to show the loader and everything, and then from here we are just returning that and we are checking here if that country code is IN, that is India, then we are returning here 91 as a country code, else we are returning as a 0. Step 2, we have to provide the definition for this fake country code client. For that we have to create here provider for fake country code provider is equal to provider. Then we have to create the instance of this class here. Now in the step 3 we also need one provider for this future provider that will return us that country code as a response and store that response in our response provider global variable. So this is the code, and here you can see we have created one global provider, that is response provider is equal to future provider, and here you can see return type is int type, and here we are just calling reference.read and then we are just reading this provider which we have created here, and from here we are returning that country code client.get, and here we are just passing that IN, that is that country name we are passing here, and it will give us that result. So now we have to use this in our UI. For that we have to use the consumer widget to wash the provider value in the UI, and this is the code. So here you can see we have extended the class with the consumer widget. There we have the widget reference, and here we are creating one variable as a response value, and there we are just passing here reference.watch, and we are just watching that value from the response provider, and here we are just calling here response value.map, and here we are checking that value code.value, and it will give us that. And here in that map you have noticed that we have data loading error. When we watch that future provider or stream provider, we get an async value type, which is a type that come from our freeze package, and when we use that when here we have that data loading error states to the different widget like this way in the data. So here you can see we have that data, in the data we have that value that is code.value, and the loading we are just showing the loader here, and then we have the error here for the, if there will be any error it will show the error here. So now suppose if we want to pass the value instead of doing the hard coding, then let's see how we can do that. In this case we have to use the family modifier that is used to pass the string value, which is used to call that get method, and here you can see we are using a future provider .autodispose.family, and here we are just passing the int is that return type of that function, and the second one is that parameter which we have to pass here reference country name, and we are putting it as a async here. And here you can see we are just calling here reference.read, and here we are just calling the provider name, and from here we are returning country code client.get, and here we are just passing the country name, and it will return us our country name here. So now let's see how we can watch and consume that provider. For that we have to call here response value is equal to reference.watch, and then we have to pass the response value, and in this one we are just calling from our UI part. In the UI we are just passing the value of this country name, and on the basis of that we are just getting the data here. So now we have to learn about the Riverpod with the state notifier. That is very important, and that is we are going to use in our all production based application, in the real-time applications. So let's see how it works and what is this. So basically we have the folder structure for this one. We have to first create a application folder. Inside that we have to create one notifier folder. Then inside the notifier folder we have to create the products_notifier.dart file. Then we have to create one provider folder, and there we have to pass products_provider.dart file. Then we have the state folder, and there we have products_state.dart file, and the second file is that products_state.freeze.data, and that is the auto-generated file that will be auto-generated from that command and everything. So now we have to understand what these files are. So basically product_state.dart file, this is the file we have to define the possible state that the state notifier can emit commonly. They are initial, loading, data, and the error. Then we have the product_state.freeze.data. So basically this is the file that is generated with the information of the class that we defined in our product_state.dart file, and it is a generated code, so we don't need to worry about much about this file. Then we have our product_notifier.dart file, and basically this file contains the definition of the product notifier, which is an implementation of the state notifier, and this will be the core of our state management. And since in this class is where we define the method that will be in the charge of changing and emitting the new state when necessary. Then we have the product_provider.dart file, and this file is where we have to define the different type of provider that we are going to use in this feature, or in the another word we could say that this file is where the feature dependency injection is done. So now let's move further. So now let's do some practical guide on that how to use the Riverpod as a Flutter State Management solution in our production application by using the state notifier. So suppose this is the JSON which we have to render in our application, and here in the JSON you can see we have that message, then we have the data. Inside the data we have product name, product price, product image, and the product ID, and we have the multiple data here. So now we have to use some packages here, and here we have to define the dependency freeze_annotation, then we have the JSON_annotation, then we have the Flutter Riverpod, and the dev dependency we have to put here build_runner, then we have the freeze, then we have the JSON_serializable. Then we have to create one class file that is a model file on the basis of this JSON, and if we compare here we have that product name, product price, product image, and the product ID according to the JSON. And here in the file first we have to give the annotation of the @freeze, then we have to make this class as an abstract class, product with underscore, we have to give that $, and the class name that is product. Then we have to put here is equal to underscore product. Then we have to create here factory for product.from JSON, and that we will get from our product from JSON, and that will be generated in our freeze.dart file. And here we have to put part product.freeze.dart, and then we have to put here part product.g.dart. Basically this will return us that toJSON method. For getting that we have to run the command here. The command is flutter pub run build_runner serve. Then we have to put a configuration like delete conflicting output. If there will be any conflicting output it will delete it, and this will generate the file for us. Then we have our API service file, and that we have to create for making all that HTTP requests, and we will place that under API folder. So this is the class we have to create, and that will be interact with our HTTP requests with the API and all. Here what we are doing, we have created one class with API service, then we are just doing the HTTP client call, and we have created one function name that is get product. There we have the request header, we have the UI.http, then we have the response here, and here we are checking if the response code is 200, that means we are getting the data and we are returning the data here. In the else condition we are just returning here null. And here you can see here we have added that APS service is equal to provider of reference APS service, and we are doing here the dependency injection for this APS service. So we don't need to initialize this class every time everywhere. We have just created a provider for this class and we can use it globally in our application. Now we have to define the state that we are expecting from the HTTP request as a freeze union, and for that we have to create the state folder inside our application folder, and there we have to define one file name that is products_state.dart file with the following content. And you can see here we have created one more class that is product state. There we have that factory for the initial, then we have the factory for the loading, then we have the factory for the data, then we have the factory for the error here. And here in the initial we are just putting in the constructor as the initial, then we have the loading here, we are putting here loading, then for the data we have the parameter for the list products, then we have that error. If there will be any error, we will pass the error message here for the error state. And here we have created an extension here. Suppose we have to just to check if it is loading or not, we can create the extension method here for handling that loading variables and all for the easy comparison. Now we have to define our product notifier, and this class extend the state notify class, and for that we have to create one new folder inside our application folder, and the name of the folder is notifier, and there we have to create one file name that is products_notifier.dart file, and then we have to provide the following contents. Here you can see we have created one class product notifier and we are extended it with our state notifier. There we are passing the product state, and here you can see we are using the APS service as a variable, and then we are passing that in our constructor so that we can take it from our provider, global provider. Then we have our function name that is getProduct, and here we are just putting the state as a loading. When we call first time this function, we will make the state as a loading. Then we have the try cache here. In the try we are just getting the product list, and we are just calling here APS service.getProducts, and there we have the state, and state we are just putting the product state dot data as that data what we are getting here. In the case of the error, we are just changing the state to our product state.error. So now we have to define our products_provider.dart file inside our provider folder, and that will be in our application folder. Here you can see what we have in this file. Here we have created a provider with our state notify provider. Here we are just passing the product notifier and the product state here, and here we are passing a product notifier with our reference.watch API service that we are passing in our constructor. So now we have defined the model classes, state notifier and the provider for getting access to the notifier. So now we have ready to build a UI here. You can see here we have this UI, and here in this UI we have created one product list visit, and we are extended it with a consumer visit. There we are doing this consumer visit so that we can access that any provider with the help of this visit reference. Then we are just checking here state here with our reference.watch, and here we are just calling here product notifier provider. Then we are just returning here with state.when, and in the initial we are just passing a container. In the loading we are just showing here circular progress indicator. In the case of that data, we are just calling our gridview.visit so that we can load all that products with our UI, and in the error we are just showing the error. So if we see in the provider case, if we are not using any Riverpod, if we do the same thing with the provider, in that case we have to do a lot of if and else condition on the basis of what we are getting the data. If data is getting load from the server, then we have to put the if condition for showing the loader. If data is coming as a empty, then also we have to put the condition, everything. In the case of error also we have to handle everything. But here in the Riverpod we need not to worry about anything. We are getting everything with the state here. On the basis of that state we are just showing everything. In the case of loading we are showing the loader here. In the case of data we are just showing that data here, and in the case of error we are just showing the error here. So now this will be the output of our application, and here you can see we are getting the data from the server, and here we are getting all that products here on the basis of this data. So in case if data is getting load, we will get here the loader here. Once the data is get loaded, then we will get this data here. So now let's move further. So now let's understand how we can update the UI on the basis of the button click. So suppose we get the data here. So now if you have any refresh button, if we have any searching here in this screen, so now how we can call this provider again to get the updated data? For that we have to just add this function in our UI. Suppose we have that function here for that button, that is floating action button we are using here, and here on the on press event we have to just call a reference.read, then we have to pass that provider name .notifier. Then we have to call that function name, that is getProduct. In case we have any variable, that we can also pass here, but here in our case we don't have any variable. We will just call here in this way, and this will be the UI. So here if I click on this refresh button, it will reload the data from the API on the basis of that state and everything. So that's all in this video. I hope you enjoyed that Riverpod and you understand a lot regarding this Riverpod, and this will help you and you can easily understand and implement the Riverpod in the application without getting confused regarding what is Riverpod and how we can use it. And now you can enjoy that NodeJS series with that Flutter, that grocery app series easily, because here all your doubt has been clear regarding that Riverpod and everything. So I hope you like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share. I will come back soon with another awesome video. Thank you for watching the video.